20 black female singers with the sexiest bodies every man desires. What if the most beautiful women in black entertainment history were also the most destroyed by it? 20 names, 20 women whose faces stopped traffic, whose voices filled arenas, whose images sold millions of tickets, and whose real lives were collapsing behind every single one of those posters. Dorothy Dandridge had $2.14 in her bank account when she died. Florence Ballard named the Supremes and died on welfare at 32. Phyllis Hyman's suicide note said only, "I'm tired, I'm tired." Tammy Terrell was beaten, diagnosed with a brain tumor at 22, and gone by 24. These are not rumors. These are documented facts that Hollywood buried under glamour and applause. Stay until number 1, because that story will genuinely change how you see beauty, fame, and who actually pays the price for both. Subscribe to Memory Lane Black People right now. This story was made for you. Joyce Bryant. Born October 14, 1927 in Oakland, California, Joyce Bryant was one of the most electrifying performers America had ever produced, and one of the most forgotten. A 4.5-octave voice that could move from whisper to operatic thunder in a single breath. A body she displayed in mermaid dresses so tight she had to be carried to the stage because walking was impossible. Silver hair created by painting radiator paint directly onto her scalp, a choice that would cost her dearly. She was raised by a devout Seventh-day Adventist mother in San Francisco, in a household where music was considered temptation and entertainment a moral danger. At 14, she eloped, and the marriage ended the same night. By 16, she was performing in Los Angeles clubs for tips. By the early 1950s, she was earning $3,500 per performance and pulling in $200,000 annually, a figure worth approximately $2.5 million in today's money, making her one of the highest-paid black entertainers in America. Her songs love, but the radiator paint had been destroying her hair follicles for years. Her scalp burned. Her throat, pushed through 8 performances a day without adequate rest, began to collapse. When her manager brought in a physician, the doctor recommended spraying cocaine directly into her throat to numb the pain and keep her performing. Her manager agreed. Bryant had to refuse for herself. The disenchantment arrived all at once. The drug culture surrounding the clubs, the gangsters who controlled the venues, a moral crisis she could no longer suppress. In late 1955, at the absolute peak of her career, Joyce Bryant walked away. She enrolled at Oakwood College in Huntsville, Alabama, a Seventh-day Adventist institution at age 28. Ebony ran the headline. Former cafe singer gives up $200,000 a year career to learn to serve God. A decade later, she returned, not as a nightclub performer, but as a trained classical vocalist with the New York City Opera. She toured Europe. She taught privately. She met with Martin Luther King Jr. repeatedly to support civil rights work. She lived quietly, purposefully, and on her own terms until November 20th, 2022. She was 94 years old. The woman who once stopped rooms with silver hair and a 4-octave voice left the world in almost complete silence, unknown to the generation that would have loved her most. Sheila G. Some names disappear not because the talent wasn't there, but because the system was never designed to hold them. Sheila G. was one of those names. Born Ida Dusil Guys in Mississippi, she grew up with her grandparents in Scott County after her parents separated early. Her features were gentle, her figure naturally slim, and her voice carried a quality that drew immediate comparisons to the warmth of a summer evening. Approachable, soft, and entirely real. By the time she was 20, she had followed her father to New York City and found herself orbiting the Apollo Theater in Harlem, working odd jobs while absorbing everything happening on that stage. Her break came from a talent contest at Club Zombie in Detroit, an unlikely starting point that led directly to film auditions. In 1947, she appeared in Boy, What a Girl, and in 1948 in Miracle in Harlem and Sepia Cinderella. Her face was everything Hollywood said it wanted from a black actress in that era. Unthreatening beauty, gentle eyes, a voice that didn't demand anything. The problem was that Hollywood never actually intended to give black actresses what their talent deserved. The doors that seemed to be opening were decorative. Her personal life moved with equal turbulence. A marriage to Shelby Irving Miller in the mid-1940s ended after 2 years, leaving her raising a young daughter alone. Her second marriage, to Kenneth Davis, a white dancer she met during the 1947 Broadway production of Finian's Rainbow, immediately attracted public scrutiny. They wed in Philadelphia and lived in the Bronx, but interracial marriage in 1940s America was not a private matter. The social pressure was relentless. Her husband, by multiple accounts, eventually banned her from acting. The marriage ended in 1954. Through it all, she kept performing. Her work in Lost in the Stars from 1949 to 1950 earned her the Outer Circle Critics Award. Her 1957 television appearance in Green Pastures earned an Emmy nomination. In 1958, she released the album This Is Sheila, showcasing a voice that critics acknowledged as genuinely exceptional. Detroit honored her with a designated day, a recognition rarely given to artists whose mainstream profiles had been deliberately suppressed. Then, in 1953, a severe stomach ulcer knocked her unconscious. Her daughter found her collapsed at home. Emergency surgery followed. Her recovery took 6 months and cost her a major Broadway role she had already accepted. The career trajectory never fully recovered. She married again in 1958 to Joseph Jackson, a New York sanitation worker, and had 2 more children. One of them, a son named Michael, died at age 3. The loss was devastating in ways that performance schedules and rehearsal notes cannot contain. In her final years, Alzheimer's disease erased the memories that had built the person. Sheila G died in Honolulu in 2013. She was 87. A woman whose talent had outlasted every obstacle placed in front of it, until the mind itself became the last obstacle. Veretta Dillard. She was born in Harlem with bones that didn't work the way they were supposed to. Congenital bone disease meant that Veretta Dillard spent much of her childhood in hospital beds, navigating a body that moved differently than the bodies of other children. The pain was constant, the medical care was intermittent. What remained consistent across every hospitalization and every difficult morning was her voice, a husky, thick, deeply emotional instrument that sounded like it had already survived everything before she was old enough to understand what survival meant. By the time she was a young woman, she had developed a stage presence that was genuinely paradoxical. The body that had been weakened by years of illness now moved with a slow, deliberate sensuality. She worked with what she had, and what she had was extraordinary. In the summer of 1951, she won the Apollo Theater Talent Contest twice. For a girl whose early life had been defined by hospital corridors, standing on that stage and winning felt like a reclamation of everything the disease had tried to take. In July 1952, Easy Easy Baby hit number 8 on the R&B charts. Her name moved from backstage whispers to radio playlists. Then came May 15, 1953, and Mercy Mr. Percy, recorded with George Kelly on tenor saxophone, Haywood Henry on baritone, and Lonnie Johnson on guitar. The song went to number 1 on the R&B charts and lodged itself into the emotional consciousness of an era. It was the sound of a woman who genuinely understood longing, because she had been longing since childhood, for a body that didn't hurt, for a world that made room for her. In early 1955, Veretta released Johnny Has Gone, a memorial to Johnny Ace, the R&B singer who had accidentally shot himself backstage on Christmas Day 1954. Veretta had been present that night with Big Mama Thornton, witnessing the grief spread through the music world in real time. The song reached number 6 on the R&B charts and permanently attached her name to the theme of loss. Then rock and roll detonated across American culture, and the landscape that had made Veretta Dillard's voice essential simply ceased to exist. By 1961, her solo commercial path had closed. She moved into gospel with her husband, using music no longer as ambition, but as therapy, eventually working with chronically ill children, bringing sound into hospital rooms where she herself had once been the patient. The money never followed the talent. Her name faded from playlists and critical conversations. Veretta Dillard died in Brooklyn in 1993 from cancer at 60 years old. The blues press called her a forgotten genius. They were right on both counts. Barbara McNair. Barbara McNair walked into television at exactly the right moment and was destroyed by forces that had nothing to do with her talent. In 1969, she became the host of The Barbara McNair Show, a nationally syndicated variety program that ran until 1972, placing her among the most recognizable black female faces on American television at the time. Beautiful, elegant, effortlessly commanding on camera, she represented something the industry had rarely offered a black woman: genuine prime-time ownership. Born March 4, 1934 in Racine, Wisconsin, McNair had built her career methodically through nightclub performances, recording contracts, and film appearances that demonstrated both her vocal ability and her screen presence. She appeared in If He Hollers, Let Him Go, 1968, and They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, 1970, alongside Sidney Poitier. Critics noted her warmth and precision. Audiences responded. Then October 17, 1972 arrived. McNair was arrested at the Playboy Club in New Jersey after signing for a package that contained 14 grams of heroin addressed to her. She had no knowledge of the contents. She had simply signed the receipt. In April 1973, she was cleared. Her husband, Rick Manzi, a Chicago businessman with documented connections to organized crime figures, took legal responsibility, but the damage was already permanent. Her television show was canceled, recording contracts evaporated, Hollywood's phone stopped ringing. The personal losses accumulated in a way that feels almost designed by cruelty. On December 15, 1976, Rick Manzi was found dead in the dressing room of their Las Vegas home, semi-nude, needle marks on his arms and legs, no signs of forced entry or robbery. The case was never solved. Organized crime connections were investigated and quietly dropped. Barbara's brother discovered the body at 4 a.m. Less than a year before Manzi's death, her mother had died. Her mother-in-law died at home in June 1977. Her father passed in November 1979. 4 devastating losses in fewer than 4 years, each one arriving before the grief from the last had processed. She married twice more, filed for bankruptcy in September 1987 with $458,000 in debt, and spent years rebuilding a performance career that the industry's memory had largely erased. A 7-year battle with throat cancer gradually silenced the voice that had once filled television screens across America. Barbara McNair died in Los Angeles on February 4, 2007. She was 72. Her story is a precise record of how quickly a system discards the people it once celebrated. Marpessa Dawn. One role. That is all it took for Marpessa Dawn to become a global icon, and all it took to trap her in a career that would never again reach that height. Born November 3, 1934 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to a father of American descent and a mother of Filipino heritage, Dawn grew up with a face that defied easy categorization. She left the United States as a young woman, moved to England for minor television work, then drifted to Paris in 1953, working as a nanny during the day and performing in small nightclubs at night. It was in those clubs that she met Marcel Camus, the French director who would permanently alter the trajectory of her life. In 1958, at age 24, she was cast as Eurydice in Black Orpheus, a Brazilian retelling of the Greek myth set against the backdrop of Rio de Janeiro's Carnival, produced by Camus with a soundtrack composed by Antonio Carlos Jobim and Luis Bonfá. The film's opening melody, A Felicidade, and the bossa nova score that ran beneath it became inseparable from Dawn's image on screen. Dark eyes, fierce vitality, a fragility that felt genuinely inhabited rather than performed. Black Orpheus won the Palme d'Or at Cannes in 1959. It won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film in 1960. It won the Golden Globe in the same category. Marpessa Dawn's face was everywhere, celebrated, praised, called a rare beauty in terms that crossed language barriers. Then Hollywood looked at her and saw a problem. Her American accent was considered too neutral for the exotic roles available to dark-skinned women. Her look was deemed too mixed, too undefined to fit neatly into the categories the studio system maintained. The leading roles that should have followed never materialized. She stayed in Europe, taking supporting parts in French films, touring in theatrical productions across France, Belgium, Switzerland, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, raising 5 children largely alone after her marriage to Marcel Camus dissolved. Bruno Mello, who had played Orpheus beside her on screen, died of a heart attack in July 2008. 42 days later, Marpessa Dawn died of a heart attack in Paris. She was 74. Two people who had loved each other for eternity on screen left the world within 6 weeks of each other from the same cause in the same year. The film that made her famous was also the ceiling of her career. She died in modest circumstances, far from the spotlight that had once found her irreplaceable. Tammy Terrell. Tammy Terrell was born Thomasina Winifred Montgomery on April 29, 1945 in Philadelphia, and she spent the 24 years she was given being loved publicly and damaged privately in ways that the Motown publicity machine worked hard to conceal. She had migraines from the age of 12, severe, recurring, the kind that bend the body around the pain and make light itself feel hostile. Doctors noted them. Nobody connected them to what was coming. At 15, producer Luther Dixon discovered her, and she began recording under the name Tammy Montgomery. By 17, she had joined James Brown's touring review, and what happened backstage became one of the music industry's most carefully suppressed stories. Fellow band member Bobby Bennett later stated plainly, Brown beat her. She bled. She left when the physical danger became impossible to absorb any longer. She signed to Motown in 1965, renamed Tammy Terrell by Berry Gordy, who said the name oozed sex appeal. She began a relationship with David Ruffin, the lead singer of The Temptations. He proposed on stage. She accepted. Then she discovered he was already married, had 3 children, and maintained another girlfriend in Detroit. The arguments escalated into violence. Ruffin struck her in the head with his motorcycle helmet during one incident that multiple witnesses documented. Despite everything happening to her body and her private life, her career soared. The duets with Marvin Gaye, written by Ashford and Simpson, produced some of the most emotionally precise recordings in Motown history. Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Your Precious Love, You're All I Need to Get By, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing. Songs that sounded like genuine love because Tammy sang them from a place where love was simultaneously the thing she most desired and the thing that kept hurting her. On October 14, 1967, performing Your Precious Love with Marvin Gaye at Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia, she collapsed directly into his arms on stage. The migraine had become something worse. Diagnosis: malignant brain tumor. 8 surgeries followed over 3 years. By 1970, she weighed 93 pounds, had lost her eyesight and her hair, and was confined to a wheelchair. Marvin Gaye was the only Motown representative her mother allowed at the funeral, an indictment of how the label had treated her in her final years that requires no additional commentary. Tammy Terrell died March 16, 1970. She was 24 years old. Her voice is still playing somewhere right now, singing about love that doesn't quit. The cruelty is that it never quit on her either. It just took a different form than the songs described. Esther Phillips. She was 14 years old when she first reached #1 on the R&B charts. 14. While other girls her age were navigating homework and Saturday afternoons, Esther Phillips was navigating tour buses, adult management contracts, backstage pressures, and a music industry that had absolutely no interest in protecting a child prodigy once she had been commercially useful. Born Esther Mae Jones on December 23, 1935, in Galveston, Texas, she was discovered at the age of 13 by bandleader Johnny Otis, who renamed her Little Esther and placed her in front of his orchestra. In 1950, Double Crossing Blues reached #1 on the R&B charts and stayed there. She was 14. The applause was real. The infrastructure around that success was not built to keep a child safe. The sensuality in her voice was never manufactured. It came from genuine experience, specifically from the experience of someone who had absorbed adult pain before she had the vocabulary to name it. Her phrasing on a slow blues felt lived in because it was. By the mid-1950s, the tours were relentless, the schedules inhuman, and heroin had arrived in her life as the thing that made it possible to keep standing. She disappeared from the charts through most of the late 1950s and the 1960s. Lost to addiction, rehabilitation, relapse, disappearance, return. Each comeback demonstrated that the voice had not only survived but deepened. The heroin had not destroyed her instrument. It had done something more complicated, allowed her to continue performing while systematically destroying everything else. In 1972, her recording of Gil Scott-Heron's Home is Where the Hatred Is from the album From a Whisper to a Scream earned a Grammy nomination. The song is an unflinching portrait of heroin addiction from the inside, and Esther sang it not as performance but as testimony, describing the home where hatred and the drug always waited. 3 years later, her cover of What a Difference a Day Makes returned her to the charts, reminding audiences that the voice was still extraordinary. But her liver and kidneys had been absorbing the consequences of decades of abuse quietly and without announcement. The body eventually presents its accounting. On August 7, 1984, Esther Phillips died in Los Angeles from organ failure. She was 48 years old. The girl who reached #1 at 14 left behind a catalog that required 60 years of distance for critics to properly assess, and a story that the music industry prefers not to tell about what it does to the children it discovers. Mary Wells. She was Motown's first superstar. Not Diana Ross, not the Supremes. Mary Wells, the 18-year-old from Detroit who walked into Berry Gordy's office with a song she had written herself and walked out with a recording contract that would make history. Born May 13, 1943 in Detroit, Michigan, Wells grew up in genuine poverty, raised by a mother who worked domestic service jobs and a father she never knew. Before she was old enough to drive, she had survived spinal meningitis that left her temporarily paralyzed, partially deaf in one ear and partly blind in one eye. She taught herself to sing through church choirs and local talent contests, channeling physical vulnerability into vocal power the way artists sometimes do when the body has already demonstrated what it can survive. At Motown, producer Smokey Robinson recognized something in her voice that he shaped into a string of hits: You Beat Me to the Punch, Two Lovers, The One Who Really Loves You. In 1964, My Guy went to #1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and the R&B singles chart simultaneously. She toured with the Beatles, who told American press that Mary Wells was their favorite American singer. The British invasion, usually credited with destroying American R&B careers, actually coexisted with her for one remarkable year. Then she left Motown. In January 1965, on the advice of her then-husband Herman Griffin, she sued to void her contract on the grounds that it had been signed when she was a minor. Legally, she won. Practically, she walked into a boycott that the industry never formally declared but consistently enforced. No subsequent label produced anything close to her Motown work. The radio presence evaporated. The bookings diminished. She continued performing through the 1980s, maintaining a loyal audience who remembered. Then, in 1990, after years of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes daily, she was diagnosed with laryngeal cancer. The disease attacked the instrument she had built her entire life around. Surgery, radiation treatment, the gradual silencing of a voice that had once made all of America sing along. She had no health insurance. The medical bills obliterated her finances within months. She was evicted from her apartment. Bruce Springsteen, Diana Ross, Rod Stewart, and Elton John contributed to a fundraising effort that raised $125,000, enough to stabilize her housing, but not enough to reverse what the cancer was doing. Mary Wells died on July 26, 1992, at Kenneth Norris Jr. Cancer Hospital in Los Angeles. She was 49 years old. Smokey Robinson delivered her eulogy. The woman who had built the foundation of Motown's commercial empire left the world without health insurance, without financial security, and without the recognition that her contributions had genuinely earned. Florence Ballard. She named the group. When Berry Gordy presented a list of possible names to a teenage girl from Detroit's Brewster Projects, Florence Ballard chose the Supremes. She assembled the lineup. She recruited Mary Wilson. She approached Diana Ross. She was the one who believed first. Born June 30, 1943, the eighth of 13 children in a family that knew economic precarity as a daily condition, Florence grew up in one of Detroit's most financially strained neighborhoods. What she possessed was a contralto voice of genuine power, warm, rich, and emotionally direct in ways that studio production could enhance but could never manufacture. Multiple musicians and critics who heard the original Supremes rehearse have stated consistently over the decades that Florence had the strongest natural voice of the three. Between 1964 and 1967, the Supremes placed 10 singles at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Florence's voice is on every single one of them. Yet as Berry Gordy's personal relationship with Diana Ross deepened, the group's internal architecture shifted. Ross was positioned as the singular face. The group was renamed Diana Ross and the Supremes. Florence's microphone was gradually moved back. Her parts became minimal. She was present but increasingly ornamental. She began drinking, not as moral failure, but as the predictable response of a person watching her own erasure in real time with no available mechanism to stop it. She missed recording sessions. She appeared intoxicated at performances. On July 1, 1967, one day after her 24th birthday, she arrived at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas for a performance in a state that Gordy found unacceptable. He ordered her onto a plane back to Detroit that same night. Cindy Birdsong replaced her permanently. Her Motown settlement covered approximately $139,000, most of which disappeared through legal fees and a mismanaged attorney relationship. Her 2 solo singles for ABC Records in 1968 went nowhere commercially. She filed a lawsuit against Motown in 1971 for unpaid royalties and lost. By 1974, she was living on welfare in a Detroit apartment, raising 3 daughters alone on government assistance. Newspapers ran the story. The woman who had named the Supremes was on welfare. She entered rehabilitation at Henry Ford Hospital in 1974. She stabilized. She began performing again in 1975 with genuine momentum. Audiences showed up. Press was positive. Optimism existed. On February 21, 1976, Florence checked herself into Mount Carmel Hospital, complaining of numbness in her hands and feet. She died the following morning from coronary thrombosis. She was 32 years old. Vanetta McGee. Vanetta McGee arrived on screen in the early 1970s with a beauty so precise and a presence so self-contained that directors didn't quite know what to do with her, except point a camera and let it run. Angular face, cold, controlled gaze, a posture that suggested someone who had decided long ago never to appear uncertain in public. She didn't announce herself, she simply appeared, and the frame organized itself around her. Born January 14, 1945 in San Francisco, California, McGee had been privately fighting since she was 17. In 1962, she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system that required treatment, monitoring, and the particular psychological strain of living with a body that had already declared itself capable of turning against you. She managed it. She kept it private. She built a career on looking invincible while carrying that knowledge. In 1972, Blackula and Hammer brought her to wider audiences simultaneously. The camera responded to her the way cameras respond to faces that contain genuine interior life. There was always something happening behind the eyes that the script hadn't put there. She followed with Shaft in Africa and Detroit 9000 in 1973, and Thomasine and Bushrod in 1974, a film that gave her a rare opportunity to develop an actual character rather than simply occupy a visual role in someone else's narrative. The problem was structural. Blaxploitation as a genre was never designed to build stars. It was designed to generate returns on minimal budgets using recognizable faces in interchangeable situations. McGee acted with complete seriousness in films that treated her seriousness as a production detail rather than an asset. Studios saw the tight shots and the visual impact and considered the transaction complete. As the genre faded in the late 1970s, she transitioned to television, appearing in Cagney and Lacey from 1984 to 1988 in a recurring role that demonstrated her range to audiences who might not have seen her earlier work. She continued working steadily, modestly, without the trajectory her early presence had seemed to promise. On July 9, 2010, Vanetta McGee died in Berkeley, California, following a heart attack suffered alone at home. She was 65. The Hodgkin's lymphoma she had first faced at 17 had been one battle in a longer war that the body eventually won. She deserved a career that matched what the camera saw in her face. That career was never offered. Tamara Dobson. She was 6 feet 2 inches tall, and the moment she walked into a room, in any context, every other person in it had to recalibrate their sense of space. Tamara Dobson was not simply tall, she was physically overwhelming in a way that American cinema had never known how to accommodate for a black woman, which made her arrival in Cleopatra Jones in 1973 feel genuinely seismic. Born May 14, 1947 in Baltimore, Maryland, Dobson had studied at the Maryland Institute College of Art before transitioning to modeling and eventually film. Her look had no precedent in Hollywood's established categories for black women. She was neither the domestic worker nor the love interest who existed at the margins of a white protagonist's story. She was the protagonist. She occupied the center. She moved through fight sequences with a physical authority that the camera captured as something between grace and inevitability. Cleopatra Jones, released June 20, 1973, turned her into an instant cultural icon. The character, a U.S. special agent who dismantles drug operations and moves through the world with absolute confidence, was precisely the black female image that had been systematically absent from mainstream cinema. Audiences responded with immediate and sustained enthusiasm. The sequel, Cleopatra Jones and the Casino of Gold, followed on June 11, 1975. Then, the genre that had created her space simply closed. As blaxploitation faded in the late 1970s, Hollywood returned to its standard configurations, and a 6'2" black woman with martial arts training and absolute screen command did not fit neatly into any of them. The roles diminished. The offers changed in character, smaller, peripheral, decorative rather than central. She continued working through the 1980s and 1990s in television and smaller film projects. Then in 2000, multiple sclerosis arrived. The neurodegenerative disease that attacks the body's ability to move began dismantling exactly the physicality that had made her remarkable. By 2004, she was living in a community care facility in Baltimore, the stage lights and camera hum replaced by the unchanging rhythms of institutional care. Tamara Dobson died October 2, 2006, at Keswick Multicare Center in Baltimore. The cause was complications from pneumonia and multiple sclerosis. She was 59 years old. The woman who had moved through film like a force of nature spent her final years unable to move at all, one of Hollywood's most precise and particular cruelties. Brenda Sykes. The entertainment industry discovered Brenda Sykes through a television dating show, which tells you almost everything you need to know about what the industry intended to do with her afterward. Born June 25, 1949 in Shreveport, Louisiana, Sykes grew up with features that read as immediately cinematic and a personality that producers in the early 1970s found easy to categorize: attractive, available, adaptable. The blaxploitation era was constructing its assembly line, and Brenda Sykes arrived at exactly the moment the machine needed new faces to process. Her film work came quickly: Black Gun in 1972, Cleopatra Jones in 1973, where she appeared alongside Tamara Dobson in the supporting role, Mandingo in 1975, a film set in the antebellum South that used its black female characters with a level of exploitation that the historical drama framing was never sufficient to dignify. The camera spent considerable time on her body and very little time on her interiority. The characters she played existed to be looked at, threatened, desired, or discarded, sometimes all four in the same scene. She was a professional. She brought more to every role than the script had placed there, but the industry had decided what Brenda Sykes was for, and that decision was not negotiable from inside the system. The roles were variants of each other: the lover, the victim, the beautiful woman in proximity to violence, and no producer was building toward anything different. By the late 1970s, as the genre collapsed, she made a decision that those who watched her career read as loss, but that she appears to have experienced as clarity. Her final recorded role was in a 1978 episode of Good Times. She stepped back from the industry that had never fully seen her and built a private life on her own terms. She married musician and poet Gil Scott-Heron in 1978. Their daughter, Gia Scott-Heron, was born from that relationship. The marriage ended in 1987 over differences in values and approach to parenting. She subsequently married Paul Claude Hudson on May 19, 1995, and maintained a life almost entirely away from the entertainment world that had briefly made her famous. Brenda Sykes is 75 years old as of April 2026, living privately and rarely discussed in any public context. She made the choice to leave before the industry could finish deciding what to do with her. That choice remains hers. Gloria Hendry. On June 27, 1973, in the United States, and July 6, 1973, in the United Kingdom, Live and Let Die opened in cinemas, and Gloria Hendry became the first black Bond girl of the modern era. The significance of that moment was immediate, documented, and then almost immediately undermined by the industry that had created it. Born March 3, 1949, in Winter Haven, Florida, Hendry had built her early career through a combination of physical presence and genuine screen intelligence that the blaxploitation genre was beginning to notice by the early 1970s. Black Caesar in 1973 and Hell Up in Harlem the same year established her as a figure whose toned athleticism and fierce screen presence could anchor action sequences without requiring the camera to do any additional work. Then the Bond assignment arrived. The character Rosie Carver, an undercover CIA operative who turns out to be a double agent, gave Hendry material that was more complex than many of her contemporaries received. She played deception with genuine psychological texture. She held scenes with Roger Moore, then at the height of his post-Connery ascent, without diminishing in the frame. The historical weight of being the first Bond girl of color in the franchise's then 11-year history was real. So was the political resistance to it. Several scenes involving her character were edited out of the version distributed in apartheid-era South Africa because the censors found the presence of a black woman in a romantic context alongside a white lead actor legally objectionable. The discrimination that had followed her professional life didn't vanish at the film's release. It found a new address. From 1973 to 1977, Hendry continued working in blaxploitation, Black Belt Jones in 1974, Savage Sisters in 1974. But the genre was already contracting. Hollywood's post-blaxploitation reset left no obvious space for the kind of physical, central, commanding black female presence she embodied. Minor television appearances continued through the 1980s and 1990s. Pumpkinhead 2: Blood Wings in 1994 demonstrated that she was still working, still present, still professional, but the scale of the platform had shrunk to a fraction of what her 1973 moment had seemed to promise. Gloria Hendry is 80 years old as of April 2026. The woman who made history as cinema's first black Bond girl has spent the decades since that history largely uncelebrated by the industry that created it.
Nina May McKini.
In 1929, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer signed Nina May McKini to a 5-year contract, making her the first African-American woman in history to sign a long-term deal with a major Hollywood studio. She was 17 years old. She had just delivered a performance in King Vidor's Hallelujah that critics across America and Europe described as incandescent. European press called her the Black Garbo. In France, her name appeared alongside the greatest film stars of the era. Born June 13, 1912, in Lancaster, South Carolina, McKini had moved to New York as a child and found her way into theater through sheer force of talent and presence. Her body moved with the precision of someone who had studied dance seriously. Her face expressed emotional complexity in the close-up shots that cinema was just learning to use. She was, by any measure that mattered to the art form, a major talent arriving at exactly the right historical moment. And MGM did almost nothing with her. After Hallelujah, the studio that had signed her simply failed to cast her. The long-term contract was never converted into leading roles, because the American market of 1929 to 1934 had no framework for a black woman at the center of a mainstream narrative. The studios knew what they had signed. They also knew that deploying it fully would cost them the Southern box office, and profit calculations consistently defeated artistic ones. She went to Europe. In England, France, Hungary, and across the continent, she found audiences who recognized what Hollywood had refused to use. She toured, she performed, she was celebrated. When war made Europe untenable, she returned to America and found work in small independent films and nightclub performances, a shadow career that bore almost no relationship to the MGM contract that had been supposed to make her a star. She lived in London and Athens during various periods of her later life, working whenever work was available, maintaining a professionalism that the industry had never fully deserved from her. In the late 1960s, she returned to New York, but made no further public appearances. Nina May McKini died in New York City on May 3, 1967, from a heart attack. She was 54 years old. The woman MGM had signed as their first black female contract player died largely forgotten. Proof that historical firsts are only meaningful if the history that follows honors what they started. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday did not simply sing songs. She dismantled them and reassembled them inside her own emotional architecture, delivering them back to the listener in a form that felt like private confession. Her timing was not about rhythm, it was about psychological precision. She heard where the feeling lived inside a lyric, and she placed her voice there, slightly behind the beat, slightly around the note, in a space that no one had previously identified as available. Born Eleanora Fagan on April 7, 1915 in Philadelphia, she grew up in conditions that the word difficult fails to adequately describe. Her mother was 17 when she was born. Her father was absent. She was sent to a reform school at 10 years old. At 11, she was sexually assaulted. She was arrested for prostitution as a teenager in Baltimore and New York. The world introduced itself to her through violence and institutional punishment, and she responded by becoming one of the greatest interpreters of romantic longing the 20th century produced, because she understood from the marrow what it meant to desire something that kept proving itself dangerous. Her recording career with Columbia in the 1930s, under the creative direction of producer John Hammond, produced sides that redefined what a popular vocalist could do. Her collaboration with Lester Young, who gave her the nickname Lady Day, generated a musical conversation that jazz historians still write about in terms usually reserved for architectural achievements. Strange Fruit, recorded in 1939, described the lynching of black men in the American South with an unflinching directness that radio stations refused to play and that audiences wept through in silence. The heroin came, the alcohol came, the legal machinery of mid-century America, which applied drug laws with particular enthusiasm to black performers who had become inconveniently visible, came. In May 1959, she collapsed at home and was admitted to Metropolitan Hospital in Harlem. While she was hospitalized, fighting liver failure and kidney failure simultaneously, federal agents arrived and arrested her in her hospital bed for drug possession. A police officer was stationed outside her room. She died on July 17, 1959, under police guard in a hospital room with 70 cents in her bank account. She was 44 years old. The government that had monitored and prosecuted her sent no representative to her funeral. 3,000 people attended anyway. Lola Falana. They called her the First Lady of Las Vegas, and that title was not honorary. By the late 1970s, Lola Falana was the highest-paid female entertainer in Las Vegas history, commanding fees that no black woman had previously negotiated in that city's deeply stratified entertainment economy. She sold out shows 20 weeks per year. The tourists came specifically for her. She was not supporting anyone else's headline. She was the headline. Born Lolitha Elaine Falana on September 11, 1942 in Camden, New Jersey, the daughter of an Afro-Cuban father and African-American mother, she grew up in Philadelphia with dancing ambitions that her strict family struggled to contain. At 16, she was performing in nightclub opening acts, chaperoned by her mother, earning $10 per show. She was so gifted, so physically compelling on stage, that dropping out of high school before graduation to pursue performing was less a rebellion than an obvious conclusion. Her early career was built under Sammy Davis Jr.'s sponsorship. She was cast in his 1964 Broadway musical Golden Boy, outcompeting 200 other dancers for the lead dancer role, and Davis subsequently cast her in the 1966 film A Man Called Adam. She became enormously popular in Italy through the late 1960s, recording in Italian, starring in Italian films, and appearing on the covers of Italian magazines in a country that found her talent and beauty genuinely remarkable, rather than commercially categorized. The Las Vegas years were the pinnacle. She performed with a combination of dance athleticism, vocal range, and comedic timing that consistently overwhelmed audiences. She was, by 1979, the highest-paid female performer in that city's history, a record that stood as a commercial and artistic achievement simultaneously. Then 1987 arrived, and her body changed the terms. She woke one morning unable to stand. Multiple sclerosis had been present in her system for some time, and now it announced itself without subtlety. Her left side was paralyzed. She lost partial vision. Her hearing was impaired. Her voice, the instrument she had spent 30 years perfecting, was compromised. Recovery took a year and a half. She attributed it to faith and a spiritual experience she described as physically felt. She returned to performing briefly before leaving show business permanently in 1989 to found a Catholic ministry focused on orphaned children in sub-Saharan Africa. Lola Falana is 83 years old as of April 2026, living quietly in Las Vegas. The woman who was once the highest-paid female performer in the city's history is known today primarily to those old enough to have seen her when she was redefining what that stage could hold. Dorothy Dandridge. In 1955, Dorothy Dandridge became the first African-American woman in history to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress. Her performance in Carmen Jones, directed by Otto Preminger, with whom she was also having a secret and damaging romantic relationship, had been so complete, so emotionally precise, so physically inhabited, that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences had no defensible basis for exclusion. She lost to Grace Kelly. She returned to a Hollywood that had no idea what to do with what she had just demonstrated. Born November 9, 1922 in Cleveland, Ohio, Dandridge had been performing since childhood, pushed by her mother Ruby into the entertainment circuit before she was old enough to have chosen it herself. She and her sister Vivian performed as the Wonder Children across the South in segregated auditoriums. By her teens, she was performing at the Cotton Club in Harlem alongside Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway, a child in a room full of adults who were navigating their own precarious positions in a deeply unjust system. Her marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas in 1942 produced a daughter, Harolyn, who was born with brain damage and required constant expensive care for the rest of her life. Dandridge blamed herself for years, absorbing a guilt that had no rational foundation but proved impossible to release. Nicholas was unfaithful and largely absent. The marriage dissolved in 1952. After Carmen Jones, the roles she was offered were insulting relative to her demonstrated capability. Hollywood could acknowledge her talent in a nomination, but could not build a career structure around it. A second marriage to restaurateur Jack Dennison in 1959 was financially catastrophic. His mismanagement depleted her savings completely, forcing her to declare bankruptcy and ultimately place her daughter in a state institution when she could no longer afford private care. By 1965, she was performing in second-rate nightclubs and struggling with alcohol and antidepressant use. She was preparing for an engagement in New York when her manager, Earl Mills, entered her West Hollywood apartment on September 8, 1965, and found her on the bathroom floor unresponsive. The toxicology report identified an overdose of the antidepressant imipramine, though whether accidental or intentional was never conclusively established. Dorothy Dandridge had $2.14 in her bank account when she died. She was 42 years old. The first Black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar was buried with those $2.14 as her final financial statement to the industry that had honored and then abandoned her. Terresa Graves. Terresa Graves made history twice, and the industry acknowledged neither occasion with the recognition it deserved. The first time, 1969 and 1970, as the Mod World Bikini Girl on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where her comic timing and physical presence established her as someone the camera found genuinely compelling rather than simply attractive. The second time, January 1974, when Get Christie Love premiered on ABC, making Terresa Graves the first African-American woman to star in her own one-hour drama series on American network television. Christie Love was an undercover detective, tough, smart, capable, operating in a world that the genre usually reserved for white male protagonists. The character was a genuine breakthrough. Graves inhabited it with a combination of physical authority and warmth that made the show immediately watchable. Born January 10, 1948 in Houston, Texas, Graves had started her career as a singer with the Doodletown Pipers before television found her. She was beautiful in a way that read as approachable, not remote, not theatrical, but genuinely present, as if she was actually there in the room with you rather than performing for a camera pointed in her direction. The problem arrived from an unexpected source, her own faith. Around the time Get Christie Love was picked up as a series, Graves had become increasingly devoted to the Jehovah's Witnesses. She began refusing to film scenes that conflicted with her religious beliefs. No scenes where her character lied, no violent sequences, no morally compromising situations. For an undercover police detective, these restrictions were operationally paralyzing. The show barely survived one season before cancellation. By 1983, she had left acting entirely to commit fully to her religious practice. She lived quietly in Los Angeles with her ailing mother, almost completely unknown to the neighbors surrounding them. In 1977, she had married William D. Reddick. They divorced in 1983. On October 10, 2002, at 12:30 a.m., a space heater in the rear of her Hyde Park, Los Angeles home ignited a fire. Her mother, who had suffered a stroke and been hospitalized days earlier, was not present. Terresa Graves was found unconscious in a back bedroom by firefighters who arrived too late to prevent what the smoke had already done. She died at Daniel Freeman Memorial Hospital in Inglewood. She was 54. The woman who had broken the color barrier in network drama television died in a fire that nobody saw coming, in a house that most of her neighbors didn't know contained a piece of television history. Phyllis Hyman. She was 6 feet 1 inch tall, which meant she entered every room before she intended to. Her voice had the same quality. It arrived before she arranged it, filled the space before the first deliberate note, carried weight that most singers spend entire careers trying to develop and never quite reach. Phyllis Hyman was, by the consensus of everyone who heard her live during her peak years, one of the most commanding vocal presences in American popular music. Born July 6, 1949 in Philadelphia and raised in Pittsburgh, Hyman made her commercial breakthrough in 1976 when producer Norman Connors featured her on his album You Are My Starship, specifically on a cover of Betcha by Golly Wow that demonstrated immediately what her voice could do to a melody that most listeners thought they already knew. Buddha Records signed her. When Arista acquired Buddha, Clive Davis retained her personally, a reliable indicator that the music industry's most commercially astute executive understood what he was hearing. Her recordings through the late 1970s and 1980s, Somewhere in My Lifetime, You Know How to Love Me, Can't We Fall in Love Again, Living All Alone, built an audience of extraordinary loyalty among listeners who valued vocal authenticity over commercial convenience. She performed on Broadway in Sophisticated Ladies, the Duke Ellington tribute musical, earning a Tony Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress and a Theatre World Award. In 1983, she recorded a James Bond theme, Never Say Never Again, for the Sean Connery film. The track was ultimately unusable due to legal complications involving the franchise's ownership dispute, a frustration she discussed openly. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, manic depression, and had been managing it without pharmaceutical medication, instead self-medicating with alcohol and cocaine in a cycle that her closest friends watched with growing alarm through the late 1980s and early 1990s. In May 1993, within 28 days, her mother, grandmother, and a close friend all died. The grief broke something open that had already been fragile. On June 30th, 1995, a few hours before she was scheduled to perform at the Apollo Theater with the Whispers, her assistant found her unconscious in her apartment at 211 West 56th Street in New York City. She had overdosed on a combination of pentobarbital and secobarbital. Her suicide note read in part, I'm tired. Those of you that I love know who you are. May God bless you. She died at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital at 3:50 p.m. She was 45 years old, 6 days short of her 46th birthday. The posthumous album her producers had been completing at the time of her death was called I Refuse to Be Lonely. It was released 5 months later, and listening to it knowing the ending is one of the more devastating experiences that American soul music offered. Dorothy Dandridge. In January 1968, Eartha Kitt stood in the White House at a luncheon hosted by Lady Bird Johnson, and when the First Lady asked for her thoughts on the Vietnam War, Kitt told the truth. She said that young American men were being sent to die in a war that had no justification, and that the crime and drug problems destroying American cities were direct consequences of a government that prioritized military spending over the welfare of its citizens. She said it in front of the First Lady of the United States and a room full of Washington's most powerful women. Lady Bird Johnson reportedly wept. The CIA opened a file on Eartha Kitt that would eventually fill over 1,000 pages. The American entertainment industry, which had access to those implications without needing the documents themselves, effectively blacklisted her for the next decade. Born Eartha Mae Keith on January 17, 1927 in North South Carolina. Her age was officially unknown until 1998, when students from her hometown discovered her birth certificate. She had grown up as the child of sharecroppers, given away by her mother, arriving in Harlem at age 9. She worked in a Brooklyn factory at 15. She was homeless as a teenager, sleeping in friends' homes and subway stations. Orson Welles, who cast her in his 1950 stage production of Dr. Faustus and created the role of Helen of Troy specifically for her, called her the most exciting woman in the world. By the 1950s, she had performed at the Olympia in Paris, appeared at the VIP Club alongside Josephine Baker, and recorded the songs that would define her persona permanently. Santa Baby, C'est si bon, Euskadara. She spoke multiple languages, She moved between jazz, pop, cabaret, and theatrical performance with a fluency that no single category could contain. The 1968 White House incident cost her the American market entirely. She worked in Europe throughout the 1970s, rebuilding in countries whose governments had not opened intelligence files on her for speaking at a luncheon. The American career she had spent 20 years constructing was replaced by a European one that appreciated what she offered without requiring political compliance as its price. She returned to American prominence gradually through the 1980s and 1990s, recording new material, appearing in Boomerang 1992, voicing Yzma in Disney's The Emperor's New Groove 2000, with a comic timing that introduced her to an entirely new generation of audiences who had no idea what the 1968 file contained. Eartha Kitt died on Christmas Day, December 25, 2008, from colon cancer at her home in Weston, Connecticut. She was 81 years old. The CIA surveillance file runs to over 1,000 pages. The career it was designed to destroy outlasted the people who opened it. 20 women, 20 careers built on beauty that the industry consumed and then discarded without hesitation. Eartha Kitt told the truth in the White House and lost a decade of her career. Nina May McKinney became Hollywood's first black female contract star in 1929 and died forgotten in 1967. Barbara McNair built a television empire and watched it dissolve overnight over a package she never opened. So here is the question that nobody in power wants to answer. Was the beauty ever really theirs? Or did it always belong to the industry that decided when to switch the lights off? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if these women's stories moved you, Memory Lane Black People has more chapters of history that fame tried to erase. Subscribe, because forgetting them twice would be the real crime.